Hi, this is Doug May, and welcome to the third chapter in our video series, the series in which we look at the picture of electricity in Quebec and as controlled by Hydro-Quebec. And we also want to look at where Churchill Falls generating station fits into that picture and how the proposed projects, which have been outlined in the MOU, the projects along the Churchill River, where they fit into it. Today, what we want to do is look at the import picture into Quebec by Hydro-Quebec. In that picture, we want to look at the volumes, how much electricity is imported into Quebec, and what are the prices that Quebec has to pay in order to obtain the electricity. Okay. So let's get started. So this is a picture which is going to look slightly familiar to many of the viewers who have been following the series. In the bottom line, we have the amount of electricity actually produced in Quebec. See that it follows its usual, what we now expect, seasonal patterns. We also see that it's got this slight downward slope because of the drought. And on top of that, we have what's available to Quebec. And so it's what's available is equal to what's domestically produced plus the imports. So it's shown by this gap in between the green line and the blue line. Well, what are the sources of these imports? Well, in this diagram, we see that they come from two main sources. One, there's in the red, there's the imports from other provinces, and then which go up and down again with the seasons and a little bump here during the summer months. We also see a little bit of a blue. Here we see a blue tip, and adding to this, and the blue tip here is additional. And the gap here between the blue and the red line are the imports from the United States. But the main imports come from other provinces. Which provinces are these? There are three provinces: Ontario, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland and Labrador. So let's see what's happening with respect to Ontario. Well, Hydro-Quebec bought significant amounts of power, that is in 2024, including about 97,464 megawatts in a very short period of time. Now, this could have been around Christmas time. But prices vary throughout the year. So as we've seen, there's what we've talked about is dynamic pricing. In other words, the price doesn't stay set throughout the year, but it depends on the market conditions of demand and supply. So it'll vary from month to month. It'll vary from day to day. And because electricity usage varies during the day, it could vary even during the day in the various markets. So set prices are not the norm in these markets. So what was the price? Well, they don't actually give a daily price or an hourly price that they use, but the price was for this power was about $32.63 per megawatt hours, which is how it's usually expressed in the industry. Household prices are in kilowatt hours, so just take that down to 3.23 cents per kilowatt hour. Why does Hydro-Quebec import? Well, it could import and export even during the same month, and may in fact be happening partially during the same day. So what these power companies, public utility companies in Canada and in the United States, are often trying to do is to optimize the use of its reservoirs as storage batteries to optimize the use of power to help minimize costs. That's the thing. What you're trying to do is. So that's Ontario. What about New Brunswick? Hydro-Quebec trades electricity with New Brunswick. It exports, as we'll see in the next video, as well as imports over the Eel River, the high voltage direct current converter station there. And consistent with most trading conditions, we talked about changing prices, sometimes referred to as dynamic pricing. The common price here is about 8 to 10 cents per kilowatt hours. So this one up here looks a little bit low, because this would be about $80 to $100 per megawatt hour, right? One thing to note is that imports from New Brunswick, maybe even Ontario, have increased due to decreasing hydro generation in Quebec due to the drought which has occurred over the past couple of years. So what about Newfoundland and Labrador and the power from the Churchill Falls generating station? Well, let's assume that 9% of the generated electricity from Churchill Falls goes to Quebec. Then if that's the case, Churchill Falls contribute approximately about 86-88% of the provincial imports into Quebec in 2023 and 2024. In other words, this is where the main action is in terms of imports for Hydro-Quebec. The approximate price to Quebec from CFELCO was about 0.475 cents. That's about half a cent per kilowatt hour. But that includes the guaranteed winter availability. But, and this is important to remember, since Hydro-Quebec is a shareholder, that is, since Hydro-Quebec owns 34.2% of CFELCO, then the effective price is about 0.308 cents per kilowatt hour. That's pretty small. The cost of the power was about 0.294 cents per kilowatt hour in 2024. And if you can look down at the bottom here, then you can see where my source is. I downloaded from Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro the financial statements for CFELCO in 2024. So that's where it came from. Okay, so let's now concentrate on imports from the United States. Well, here's a chart which shows those imports from the U.S. Notice I've only said that from New York, the state of New York. And that's because Hydro-Quebec doesn't seem to import from any other state, although it does the Maine and New York, and it has transmission lines into New England ISO. Here we look at imports, and again, it's, I'll put it down here as megawatt hours. And along here we have, well, basically, because we go back to 2015, there really isn't very much action. There is some action in January. They seem to run sometimes short of power. So you can almost pick out the Januaries here by the little bumps. And here there's a big bump here for some reason in January 2022. But the other feature which we want to look at is look at in the last couple of years, big increase here. Why is it becoming a feature on the map? Well, because of climate change and the drought. Now, here we have a diagram looking at the price of imported electricity. I've mentioned before that this is a free market, so exchange, and the market changes month to month, and it can change from, presumably even on a daily basis. The source of the data is from the Canada Energy Regulator. Sometimes the data just doesn't seem to be that consistent. That's a nice way of putting it. And I've called them, I've emailed them several times, and I haven't been able to get a response. So if you're able to get a response, I think it would be helpful if you could pass any information you get on from them about their consistency to me. But look at here, you're back in January 22. You're importing a lot of power, but at $200 per megawatt hour, that's about 20 cents per kilowatt hour. The other thing which we notice here, big increases in January, big increases in January. And here we see this increasing profile here because of a series of reasons in the United States: climate change, technological change, growing populations, etc. Right? So it's an upward trend, and is expected to be an upward trend. So the latest month, which we have, is July of 2025 here. The import electricity from New York by Hydro-Quebec is $70.40 per megawatt hour. That's 7.4 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's still a fair amount of money. It's certainly a lot more expensive than the power that they're importing from Churchill Falls, isn't it? When you look at this diagram, you'll see domestic demand and supply for electricity in Quebec. The green line is for availability. The supply, this is domestic demand. There's a bit of a gap here. And so the difference between this domestic demand and supply, as we'll see in the next video, you can export this. This is excess. But here we're getting, look at what's happening here. You've got a fair gap here between these. But it seems to close down last year. So they really thought they had a problem in 2023. Well, they've got more of a problem in 2024, and they've got seems to even have more of a problem this year, because look at between April and this is July, then demand meets supply. So they basically have nothing available for export. If Quebec really wants to be a net exporter, then it's got to find extra power available to it. They want power to it. They want green energy, because that's part of their long-term plan to 2035, promoting green energy. They put transmission lines, new transmission lines, into New England through Maine. They put transmission lines into New York. They want to be an exporter to New York because of the price of electricity, which is free market price, which you can pretty well guess where the proposed Churchill River projects fill in. Where do they come in? Primarily as a cheap source of imported power to Quebec, potentially for meeting peak load demands. So again, what you might want to do is to save water in your reservoir. If you can import cheaply, import it. Save water in your reservoir, but then export it. When would you export it? Well, you try to export it, possible when you get the biggest price for your electricity. When would that be? January, February, and to a lesser extent in July and August. The other thing you'd like to do is, because businesses love certainty, you'd like to set an annual price. The markets that they're doing, these free markets, are highly uncertain. The price can vary, as we say, from month to month in somewhat of predictable fashion, from day to day in somewhat of predictable fashion. But the big unknown, of course, is what's going to happen over the next 5 years or so, when the Americans are saying that the demand for electricity, renewable electricity, could go up by about 25%. The other thing is that jobs during construction. The fact that you get jobs during these construction projects has been a historical issue I suppose, going back for a century, and certainly in Newfoundland and Labrador, is, from the time of the beginning of the Second World War, when jobs were available in construction, when the Canadian and American war effort came to Newfoundland and Labrador, there were bases to be built, airfields to be built. So the next part is the storyline. For all the people who say charts and numbers confuse me, so what's the storyline? And once again, I'll leave this for you to read, so just pause your computers. The second slide. And basically, well, that's it for video 3A on imports. Our next video is on exports, and we really want to zero there on exports to the United States, because those are free markets, and there both Newfoundland Labrador Hydro and Hydro-Quebec not only act as cost minimizers, but profit maximizers. And Hydro-Quebec is saying that they've made a lot of profit from their sales to the United States, though that's going down once again, because as we'll see, that the amount of power they're able to export is declining fairly rapidly. All right, well, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.